together, we are building that very resilience. On health security, we've provided 231 million doses of safe, effective COVID-19 vaccines to African countries, free of charge. At the summit, President Biden committed to investing at least $4 billion by 2025 to help African countries train and equip healthcare workers to meet citizens' needs. We're also expanding the capacity of African countries to manufacture vaccines, tests, and therapeutics in Africa, for Africans, and indeed, for the world beyond. On food insecurity, we provided more than $11 billion over the last year to address global hunger and improve nutrition. Much of this assistance has gone to African countries, which have been disproportionately impacted by the drivers of hunger: COVID, climate, and conflict, and by President Putin's war on Ukraine, which has made a serious crisis much worse. We're making unprecedented investments to help African countries fulfill their goal of not only being able to feed their own people, but those around the world. 16 of the 20 partners in the Feed the Future program, our flagship program to reduce malnutrition and increase food security, are in Africa, where innovations like high-yield, high-nutrition crops that can endure extreme weather are putting communities on the path to greater resilience. Now, we know that the climate crisis is a major driver of increased food insecurity and the spread of deadly viruses. It's exacerbating tensions that can spark and spread deadly conflict. Yet, as the President often points out, it's also a once-in-a-generation's opportunity to create good-paying jobs for the future. That's why we committed to foster a just energy transition that can both meet the region's need for more reliable, affordable energy and, at the same time, create opportunities for businesses and workers in African countries and the United States as well. Since January of 2021, we've dedicated massive resources toward this very goal: solar energy in Angola, wind power in Kenya, hydro energy in Ghana, and a new $100 million project that the President announced to expand off-grid access to solar energy. And that's just to name a few of the initiatives and projects that we're working on. We're deepening the resilience of African communities to a changing climate through a $150 million adaptation fund. And this is critical, and you've heard the President talk about this. We have a responsibility in the United States, as historically the largest emitter in the world, and now still the #2 emitter after China, to help countries adapt, to help them build resilience. And we are putting the resources, we're putting the technology, we're putting the technical know-how into doing that and sharing it with our partners. We're teaming up with governments and NGOs to incentivize the protection of irreplaceable natural resources like the Congo Basin rainforest, which absorbs more carbon than is emitted by the entire continent of Africa. Finally, we committed to work with African partners to fulfill the promise of democracy. That includes helping strengthen its core pillars: the rule of law, human rights, a free press, as well as addressing some of the root causes of insecurity, which undermines the ability of democracies to actually deliver for their people. Yesterday, President Biden hosted a small group of leaders to discuss how we can help support free, fair, and credible elections in 2023, like the ones we saw in several places this year, including Kenya. As part of that discussion, the President pledged to work with Congress to provide over $165 million to support elections and good governance in Africa in the coming year. These will be key themes of the second Summit for Democracy coming up in March, where Zambia will be one of our co-hosts. Where there are crises and conflicts, we are supporting the African leaders, the regional institutions, and citizens who are stepping up to find diplomatic solutions. That's what we've demonstrated over the last year through our diplomatic engagement in places like Chad, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Eastern DRC. We know African countries face real security concerns, including terrorism and transnational organized crime. The message we sent this week is that African nations can continue to count on the United States as a partner in building more effective and accountable security forces. So, if you're keeping score, and I couldn't cover everything, there are a lot of commitments there. And we know that commitments are only as good as our ability to deliver on them. That's why we asked one of our most experienced senior diplomats, Ambassador Johnny Carson, to return to the State Department as our special representative for the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit implementation. With nearly 4 decades of experience as a diplomat, deep relationships across the region, I can think of no one better to ensure that our words are actually translated into action. Across every single one of our priorities, civil society will play a critically important role, and in particular, youth. Today, the median age in Africa is 19 years old. By 2030, 2 in 5 people on this planet will be African. And the choices that rising generations make will shape the future, not just for Africa, but for the entire world. That's why we're investing more in Africa's emerging leaders, more than ever before. The Vice President announced that we plan to devote an additional $1.1 billion over the next 3 years to youth programs like the Mandela Washington Fellows, a number of whom took part in this summit, and of course the Ali Network, which provides tools, resources, and a virtual community for now more than 700,000 rising leaders across the continent. Of course, a big part of that is investing in women and girls, because we know that when they have the opportunity to reach their full potential, when they're empowered to lead in business and government and communities and families, all of society benefits. The very first gathering that I took part in this week was a meeting of rising African innovators and entrepreneurs. The energy, the ingenuity of this group, its eagerness to turn so many of the problems that we face into opportunities, and to do so in partnership with the United States, is truly inspiring. It's impossible to feel cynical in their presence because they're so energized, they're so committed to serving their communities, they are so full of good ideas. And that kind of sums up the way that we feel coming out of this summit. As the President said yesterday, we're all in on Africa's future, because we know that the future of African nations and the United States is a shared one. And in what the President's called a decisive decade, that partnership is more vital than ever. With that, happy to take some questions. Thank you.
We'll start with Sean Tandon of the AFP, please.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Sean, where are you? There you are.
Good to see you. Could I just pursue in some more detail a couple of the security issues that you mentioned?
Sure.
DRC, you mentioned the DRC in your remarks. You met with President Tshisekedi. If not mistaken, you did meet with President Kagame. What was the reason for not meeting with him? Does that indicate any sort of pessimism with controlling the M23 situation in the eastern DRC? Ethiopia, you did meet with Prime Minister Abiy. How do you see the Pretoria Agreement going forward? The fact that you met with him, does that show that Prime Minister Abiy is back in U.S. good graces? Could there be discussion, perhaps, of renewing AGOA membership for Ethiopia? And if I could just pursue AGOA a bit more broadly as well, the President talked about a U.S. MOU with the nascent free trade agreement of Africa. What does that mean for AGOA? I mean, should African leaders presume that AGOA is finished after 2025? Thanks.
Great. Sean, thank you very much. Let me say this a little bit more broadly before addressing the specific conflicts you point to. As I said a moment ago, the approach that we've taken, actually from day one of this administration, has been to support and empower African-led solutions to challenges the continent faces, including the conflicts that you've alluded to. And from day one, whether it's Ethiopia, Eastern DRC, Somalia, Sudan, the State Department has been deeply engaged, and we've lent our support, our assistance to the African Union, to the EAC, to other regional groupings, to individual countries, to try to help solve these challenges. That's been the approach we've taken. We believe that whenever and wherever we can find African-led solutions to these challenges, we're going to be better off, they're going to be more sustainable, and I'm proud to say that our diplomats have played, I believe, important roles in helping to move some of these forward. So, with regard to Rwanda and the DRC, first of all, I spoke to President Kagame on the phone just before the summit, and we had a good conversation, just as I had a chance to speak here in Washington to President Tshisekedi. And I can say this, there is a two-track approach and these tracks are pretty much joined. The Nairobi process and then the efforts that Angola is leading that led to an agreement in Luanda, where all sides made commitments to, in effect, pull back and de-escalate the situation. That's an important agreement, and if and as it's implemented, I think it offers tremendous promise for ending the current conflict and hopefully leading to more durable stability in the eastern DRC. Now, a big part of that is M23 genuinely pulling back. And there, we are looking to Rwanda to use its influence with M23 to encourage that and to move that forward. At the same time, any militarized non-governmental group needs to stand down, and that includes groups like the FDLR. And we're looking for all sides to use their influence to ensure that that happens. Rwandan forces need to pull back. So the challenge now is implementation of what was actually agreed, and that's what we're working on with the leaders in question, but also critically with those who are playing a leading role in trying to reduce tensions and resolve conflict, notably Kenya, Angola, the EAC, et cetera. So I have some hope that we now have an agreement and a process that can lead to that result. That's what we're working on. The President of the DRC, the President of Rwanda, and with all of the others in the region who are leading this effort. With regard to Ethiopia, there too, we have a very important cessation of hostilities agreement that has led over the last few weeks to a significant reduction in violence in Tigray. The start of humanitarian assistance getting in significant quantities, the beginning of the restoration of services, and we hope as well the need to verify with international monitors that human rights abuses are no longer taking place. Implementation of this agreement, just as with the Luanda agreement, is the critical piece. Agreement's there. We need to make sure it's implemented, and that ideally the implementation is done as quickly and as effectively as possible. Another critical component of this agreement is for Eritrean forces to withdraw from Tigray. And we're looking to that, and I've had discussions with a number of the leaders who are here about the need to see that happen. So in both of these cases, I think we have now positive foundations to try to reduce tensions, resolve conflicts, create a stronger foundation for durable peace. But these things are fragile. They demand constant engagement, constant effort, and part of what we did here in Washington this week with the relevant actors was to work on the roadmap ahead for implementing these agreements. So there'll be a lot of follow-up in the days to come. With regard to AGOA, it's produced, I think, tremendously positive results in the time that it's been in force, and we are discussing now with all of the different stakeholders, the partner countries, the private sector, our Congress, and listening to them, learning from them about how AGOA can be as effective as possible, and having these conversations as we look to see where we take it once it expires, as you said, in 2025. As to countries and their participation in AGOA, the law has clear criteria, and we simply apply the facts in any given case to the law.
Anthony Osei Brown, Bloomberg Africa.
Hi, my name is Antonio Osei Brown from Bloomberg Africa. You mentioned protecting democracy, encouraging democracy in Africa. And one of the meetings you had yesterday with the Ghanaian government, he raised the question of the Wagner Group being allocated a mine in Burkina Faso, and basically called on the U.S. to help protect democracy in West Africa. And I'm wondering, what assurances are you giving to the Ghanaian government and to your allies in the region that you protect them from destabilization from the activities of the Wagner Group or mercenaries in the region?
Yeah. So, a few things to be said about this. Wagner Group came up in a number of conversations over the course of this week on the margins of the summit, including, indeed, in my meeting with President Akufo-Addo of Ghana. We've heard repeated concerns that Wagner and groups that are linked to it manufacture or exploit insecurity. They threaten stability. They undermine good governance. They rob countries of mineral wealth. they violate human rights. And we've heard that and seen that again and again. If you go back to 2017, Wagner forces have deployed to the Central African Republic, they've deployed to Mozambique, to Mali, to Libya, and at the same time, we've seen disinformation campaigns that are furthering the exploitative goals that Wagner and its founder have quite literally across the continent of Africa. There are United Nations investigations that detail the targeting of minority groups, the killing of civilians in Central African Republic, in Libya and Mali by Wagner forces. I had called out Wagner recently in a report that we put out on international religious freedom for its activities in the Central African Republic. These investigations have documented human rights abuses. They've documented recruitment and use of child soldiers. And they've also documented the exploitation of resources that Wagner engages in. And we've also seen Wagner interfere with UN peacekeeping operations, endangering peacekeepers, endangering United Nations personnel. It's a long litany of bad things. And then the bottom line ultimately is this. Wherever we've seen Wagner deploy, countries find themselves weaker, poorer, more insecure, and less independent. That's the common denominator. That's the common story across the board, which is why it's so important that we work together with partners in Africa to make them resilient to something like the Wagner Group. We have something called the Global Fragility Act that is now being implemented in an effort to address, in a very comprehensive way, problems of instability so that there's not a vacuum that something like Wagner comes in and tries to fill. We're using all of the relevant tools that we have to counter its influence, everything from sanctions to exposure, some of which I've just done, bolstering state capacity.